got it. Luther, did you have a letter in one of the newspapers recently?
It was in the Post on Saturday.
That's right. That's right. I saw it. My days of writing letters to newspapers are pretty much over, but I really love to see other people's.
Well, I had hoped a year ago to not have to write as many letters to the editor as I had been writing since January 20th, 2017.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Indeed, indeed. Well, Franna is writing a lot of letters to Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema these days, although I'm not sure that it's a hopeful task, but you never know. But,
Yeah,
so, where is everybody today? It's a small number.
I think you should go ahead, though. People can join us.
Okay,
Might be competing with something else going on now.
okay. Let's start with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so we are in Parashat Truma, and we are in Shmot in Exodus chapter 25, verse 1. Chapter 25, verse 1. Um, and does someone want to read there through verse 7?
I can. I can do it. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart so moves him. And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli, and other stones for setting, for the ephod and for the breastpiece."
Okay, great. So there are several things that we need to look at. The first is the comparison of the Hebrew. In that first sentence, Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, Daber el bnei Yisrael vayikhu li truma me'et kol ish asher yidabenu libo. So in the English it says that they should bring me gifts. But the Hebrew doesn't say that. What does the Hebrew say? Vayikhu li truma. What is lakachat?
Take. Take. To take.
To take. Right. So what do you think the inference is of the difference between to bring me gifts and to take me gifts? Usually if you're going to have an object that you're going to bring, this is obviously about the building of the Mishkan. The chapter and verse is Exodus chapter 25, starting with verse 1 through 8. So what's the difference to take a gift or to bring a gift? Anybody have any ideas? What happens to you when you have an object that you are going to give as a gift? What happens to you emotionally when that happens?
I think there's more of an intention when you're bringing a gift, that you're bringing, it's a more heartfelt, there's a certain intention. Sounds like when you take a gift, you're being told to do something, it's an obligation, there's more of a different kind of motivation.
There's a different kind of motivation. Lahavi truma and lakachat truma are substantively and qualitatively different experiences. When I go to Shabbat dinner at someone's home, 95% of the time I bring something. But sometimes I don't because of the circumstances and whatever. But I think very carefully about what I'm going to bring because I want the recipients to feel good, but I particularly want to feel good. And that's why that second part of it, Asher yidavenu libo, whose heart so moves them. There is a dynamic going on here about taking a donation to the Mishkan where the heart of the donor is involved in the giving. And there is a need of the donor to give in a meaningful way. So I wanted to, if you could put up the screen share, Audrey. Let's look at this. And we've read the section. And now let's go into it just a little bit more deeply. The Lord spoke to Moshe saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring or to take me gifts. You shall accept gifts from me from every person whose heart so moves him or her." In Truma, we read that God has instructed Moshe to tell the people to bring gifts for the building of the Mishkan, the portable tabernacle that our people carried through the wilderness. Daber el bnei Yisrael vayikhu li Truma. Speak to the people of Israel and tell them to bring gifts to me. Though the sentence is often translated as tell the people to bring gifts to me, the Hebrew says literally tell the people of Israel to take gifts to me. Had it literally said to bring gifts to me, it might have said vayaviu li truma. So how do we explain this? But let's note the second part, me'et kol ish asher yidavenu libo tikhu et trumati. You shall accept gifts from me from every person whose heart is so moved. Now here we have something which is very interesting. It is not a mitzvah. It is not a commandment. And the truma, the donations that are given, are entirely voluntarily, entirely from the hearts of the people giving. What we will discover is that as we go on into the next parshiot and finally in Vayakhel, is that there is so much being given that God tells Moses to or Moshe tells the people to stop, that it's enough. Would that have been the case for all synagogues and all Jewish organizations and all nonprofit charities that need money, that people would be, their hearts would be so moved that they would keep giving even though it was not a commandment. It's very important to note here that that phrase designates it as not a commandment. I'm seeing a little hand on the screen, but not in. Is anybody holding up their hand? No. Okay. I wanted to tell you, it says here, Lenny Walensky story. I wanted to tell you a personal story, which I've never forgotten. It was so important to my understanding of this difference between Yikhuli and Yaviuli, the difference between taking a gift and bringing a gift. When I was in graduate school at UCLA, way back in the prehistoric era, I had a visit from a very close friend of my father's. My father, Zichrono Livracha, had a dear, dear friend, Lenny Walensky, who he grew up with in Canada. And they were like brothers. My father went the route of working for Jewish organizations and didn't make a lot of money. And Lenny went into business and became the Bernie Marcus of Canada. He was the owner of the largest hardware store chain in Canada and was an extremely wealthy man. I was a graduate student and living on really starving income at the time. I lived in an studio apartment that I paid at that time $125 a month rent, and I was really struggling. Lenny and his wife Sally came from Canada for a visit in Los Angeles, and invited me for brunch at the hotel where they were staying, and I went. And at a certain point, Lenny began to quiz me about my finances, and I was honest. I said it was rough, but I was handling it. And he said, wouldn't it help you a lot if I gave you a stipend per quarter? At that time, UCLA was on the quarter system. I don't know what it is now. But if I sent you a few $1,000s per quarter to help you out. And I was very, very proud and independent at the time. And I said, Lenny, he had already done a great deal to help my family, to help my parents. And I said, you've helped my family so much. I'm young, I'm strong, I'm resilient, and I can handle this. There's no need to help me, thank you. At that point, almost as if on cue, Lenny got up to go to the restroom, and Sally was sitting there with me alone. And she said to me, you know, Layla, he needs to help you. By this point, my father was deceased. And he said, if your father were still alive, he would move mountains to help you. Lenny can help you. It's not difficult for him, but more importantly, Asher, um, um, you, what is it?
Share Yidvenu Libo.
Yidvenu Libo, thank you. His heart is moved to help you. And she actually used those words. And she said, he needs to help you because he needs to help his dear friend Alex. You would be giving him a gift if you accepted his help. And Lenny was away from the table for perhaps 5 minutes. And as if Audrey, if you could raise the screen share. I wrote, at that moment I learned a deep lesson about the gift we give when we learn to receive. And I believe it addresses the 2 sentences I have noted on our Torah text. In instructing our people to take rather than give gifts, the Holy One was offering them the gift. And in emphasizing that their gifts must be heartfelt, God was asking them to search deep within so that they might find their own deepest meaning in the gift. As each person brought a gift for the Mishkan, each one took the gift they received through the act of giving, and in this way their hearts were stirred. Something energized the people as they brought their gifts so much that later Moshe has to ask them to stop. They have brought so very much, and in the end they have taken and they have received so very much more. So I think that the lesson here in these few lines is to say that gift giving, whether it's for the Mishkan or personally for ourselves, is always a case of the gift giver's need to give the gift because it has an effect on us, a heartfelt effect on us. And we can apply that to our donations to our shul. We can apply that to our donations to tzedakah, etc. None of us can give limitlessly, but what we do give, we give because we care so much about whatever the recipient is, whether it's a bottle of wine or a few $100s or more to the shul or to a tzedakah. And that's why this nuance of the Hebrew, I don't think was coincidental. I think the v'yikhu, the difference between v'yikhu and v'yaviu is really quite cogent. Okay, can we put the screen a little bit up? And then we go to the next verse, where it says, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham. It doesn't say Vasuli Mishkan, which is implied in the next part of the sentence. Let them make me a sanctuary, a mikdash, a holy place, a sacred place, that I may dwell from Shekhinah, from the divine presence, within them. So now if we could put the screen down and have a little conversation. What does it mean that God is saying, V'shachanti b'tocham, that I dwell within them? Let them make me this sanctuary, this physical edifice, portable edifice that is going to be taken, we're going to be taking with us through the wilderness. And I am going to be dwelling within them, not within it. What's going on here? Luther?
This will really sound strange, but Steve Brody will appreciate it. I just finished reading a science fiction novel by the author of The Martian. His latest is The Hail Mary Project. And spoiler alert, sort of vaguely, in it he encounters the protagonist encounters an alien entity whose internal biology is so strange that the two of them cannot share the same chemical physical environment. So the alien entity has to encase itself in a life support system that's portable. And so the leap that I'm making here is that we know this is a metaphor. We know that there are other places in the Torah where the metaphor basically says, you can't handle looking at me directly. You will die. And it's the same thing. So in a sense, that tabernacle is a life support system for the metaphor God concept.
Huh. That's a lovely idea. The Mishkan itself is the life support system, yet the dwelling itself is within the individuals, these two individuals who couldn't live with each other without the Mishkan, without the life support system. Lovely, lovely. Shlomo.
Yeah, I think I was going to say something similar, but I want to point out, does God need to have a specific place to be among the people? And my feeling is that it's the people by their godly acts who are going to bring God into the community. And so v'shachanti b'tocham means I will actually be in the people, and through their actions, they will bring God into the community. I also think, I like to think, that this first Mishkan, which when we think about how the camp was actually geographically set up, turns out to be the first Jewish community center where people can gather and whatever. But I like that notion too.
Beautiful, because that goes right into, Audrey, can you put up the screen share again? This is a contemporary rabbi from the sort of new Hasidic community. And he writes something kind of similar. But he notes another grammatical nuance, which is it doesn't say v'shachanti b'tocho. You know, he doesn't say that the Torah adds another sentence saying each individual person who takes, who brings me a donation, I will live within him or her. He says v'shachanti b'tocham. It's plural. It's plural. So we start with a real life story told by Rabbi Pesach Krohn. Why does the pasuk use a plural tense to refer to the one singular sanctuary that is to be built? And by implication, he's also asking, why does it indicate a plural for the people who are donating? Can someone please read from the literal meaning? I can't see all of you, so I can't call on you.
This is Nancy. I'll be happy to read it.
Thank you.
The literal meaning of the pasuk is clearly referring to the sanctuary that the Israelites were shortly going to build. But the Nefesh HaChaim, Rav Chaim Volesner, classic work on Jewish thought, explains that by speaking in the plural, the Torah is teaching us that every person has the ability to become a dwelling place for the divine presence in the world. By refining ourselves and improving our character traits, we turn ourselves into a place the Shekhinah can feel comfortable dwelling in. We actually become an additional place in this world for Hashem's presence to reside. This then is what the Almighty meant when he said, "And I will dwell in them." Hashem, if we allow him to, will dwell in us.
Right. So before you go on, so what's happening here is that v'shachanti b'tocham is that each singular individual person becomes the Mishkan. And she or he then contains the sacredness of the Mikdash and will act accordingly. And then, in addition, is what Shlomo brought to us, is that when you have the conglomerate of each individual acting in that sacred way and becoming the Mikdash, the conglomerate of all of those people together create the kahal, create the community, which is, as Shlomo suggested, the Jewish community, whether it's a JCC or the people of Israel wandering in the wilderness. So Nancy, can you continue with Mr. Tommy Bloomfeld? This is now Rabbi Pesach Krohn's drash on it.
While Mr. Tommy Bloomfeld was sitting for his father at the home of the deceased, he had the company of friends and family who came to console him. One morning entered a Greek gentleman, a total stranger, and made his way to where Tommy was sitting. Before Tommy could say anything, this fellow pointed his finger and exclaimed, "You are a champion." This man proceeded to introduce himself and explained that he lives directly across the street. "You see," he began, "I am a retired for a number of years now, and I don't have to get up so early in the morning. But one morning a few years back, I happened to be up at 5:30 and saw how you came to pick up your father. I watched how you held his hand gently and helped him down the front stairs. I watched how you walked him to your car to take him to the synagogue. I could not get over how you treated him with such respect and dignity. So I got up again the next morning and again watched how you afforded him such loving care. I had never seen anything like it. Then I made it a point to get up every morning just to watch you come and care for your father. That daily scene carried me through my entire day." The gentleman was overcome with emotion and struggled to continue. "But now that he died, where am I going to get my inspiration? What am I going to do now?" And with that, he burst into tears and ran out of the house. Someone who hones him or herself into a person with patience, sensitivity, and more perfect character traits will be an inspiration to others. People will see that such a person has something special and is a sanctuary where the Almighty himself causes his presence to rest.
Okay, we can take it down now. So this reminds me of the teaching, mitzvah goreret mitzvah. In this case, not so much a commandment, but a kind deed causes another kind deed. Tommy Bloomfeld's actions caused in the Greek gentleman an impulse to do good. And Tommy Bloomfeld himself, now having lost his father of blessed memory, would now have to learn what his next kind deed was going to be. But he became the sanctuary. V'shachanti b'tocham. So now let's expand it to the synagogue itself. How does that work in a synagogue context? How does the concept of V'shachanti b'tocham work at a Dat Shalom, for example? It's a place that you pray, it's a place that you learn, it's a place that you have your social life and so on. But how does it come from simply a place that those things happen into a Mishkan where Yud He Vav He dwells within you? Malka and then Ralph.
Okay. Well, one way is then when one of the members of your shul might need, you find out they need some help of some sort. Maybe they're sick. Maybe you want to give them food. And so that act of bringing food to them displays an action that of giving and receiving and supporting each other in the community.
Right. And how do you feel when you do that?
Oh, you feel good. Both people feel good about it. There's nourishing and there's nourishment, and it's a good thing all the way around.
Good. So it goes back to vayikhu or vayaviu. Goes back to that same sense that it's not only, it's Lenny Walensky helping me because he needs to. It's not only the altruistic act of bringing the food to the individual,
Right.
It's also the selfish, in the best sense of the word, act.
Right.
Ralph?
Yeah, I'm just going to extend that it has the physical trappings, but it's the people that make it a sacred space by what they do together and reinforce it and kind of help each other. They make each other mentions by how we interact. It's a community.
Right. It's a community. Cum unitas. A community, a unity with together. A unity together. Good. Okay.
Marcia has her hand up too, Lana.
Yes, Marcia, please.
I was just going to say the Hebrew word for neighbor, right, or neighborliness is shachen, which, really comes from the same root that we're talking about. So, we all know the benefit of having a good neighbor. And I think a community like a Dat Shalom, at least I know for me, with so many good people, right, it raises up the desire to do good because of the presence and the culture that's created there.
Whoops. You disappeared. Oh, you went to a different place on my screen. Yes, absolutely. And something happens in the interaction between people. Some of the people who became my greatest friends at Adat Shalom were the people who, when I was ill 10 years ago, were the ones who I didn't really know very well, but who became my helpers. And I've never forgotten their kindness. I've never forgotten their kindness. And that's where their hearts moved them. And my heart was moved. And we became a community to each other. Became a community to each other. Let's go back to the...
one more comment real quick. Sue-Ann has a comment.
Who does?
Sue-Ann, do you have a comment? Sue-Ann, your hand's up.
Yes, I don't see your face, but I see your hand.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I don't know why you don't see my face. I haven't figured that part out yet. But I just want to point out that that's true of any community. It's not necessarily a religious community. So far, since we moved to Silver Spring, I've experienced that from the community of the condo building I'm living in. I have not experienced it from the synagogue. I've met very few people from the synagogue. But that's true for the community that I do feel a part of, which is the building that I'm living in that has 150 units. So it's not necessarily related to anything to do with religion.
It can be, absolutely. It's not exclusive to religious community. I live in a 55 plus community where, of all the places I have lived, I have not experienced as much friendly neighborliness as I do here. When our dog passed away last February, it's the first time in my life that I ever experienced from a community that is predominantly non-Jewish. I experienced Shiva calls and Shiva notes and little packets of cookies and things of other kinds to try to comfort us from that. We had had that dog for almost 13 years, and people there were neighborly in a way that I had never experienced, except I have to say for Israel, which is in many ways a much more neighborly country. Absolutely. Any additional comments? Yes, Marilyn.
I wanted to ask, and I was thinking about this last week, if what we're saying is the way Judaism is really built, why is it that 10 are required for certain prayers? And does the number 10 have special significance in Judaism because 10 commandments, 10 people? Those are my one question lingering from last week and one sort of bringing me to this week's discussion.
Well, throughout Jewish history, one thing was that 10 was the kind of prerequisite for a legitimate. Am I not being heard, or I'm seeing some sounds? Steve, you are making.
Oh no, I was just pointing to 10 fingers. It's part of our anthropomorphic design.
That's true. Also, in Judaism, 10 was the prerequisite number to designate a place as a community. If you didn't have 10 people, it wasn't a community, which is one reason. The other is, remember way back to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, when God is looking at the righteous people in those two towns, and God says to Avram, I will not destroy these cities if you can find me 10 righteous men, but 10 righteous individuals who will be God-fearing and who will follow my commandments. And and there's a bargaining process that goes on, and eventually it doesn't start with 10, it starts with 50 and it goes down, and finally can't even find 10 in those two towns to indicate righteousness in the town, and the two towns are destroyed. And then Marcia and Kevin point out the 10 spies, that when Moshe sends out the spies to reconnoiter the land of Israel, 10 of them come back and they're afraid. And they say, we can't do this because there were giants there. But 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua, say, yes, by all means, let's try. And then I see, good that a minion does not require 10 righteous men. Well, we don't ask for credentials each time, but I would venture a guess that all of us that none of us would pass unequivocally to that. But so 10 is for many reasons in Judaism a number that is venerated. Requires 10 vaccinated people in our day and age. Absolutely. Audrey, let's put up the final the source sheet again and go to number 3. How a community shapes its sacred space. Now we're looking at space, communicates very much about what they expect to happen there. It even communicates their theology. So one question is, does God dwell beyond the mitzvot, beyond the acts of kindness that occur there, in the sacred space of the Adat Shalom sanctuary? And if so, how? What would you say about that? And I can't see the screen, so Audrey, can you help me if someone has raised their hand? Some of you have long memories, I hope. Steve.
So I'd say whenever a godly act or act of community happens in the sanctuary or elsewhere, God is present, because I'm into predicate theology.
So God is definitely present. I want to remind you of the inception of the building of Adat Shalom. Kevin or Marcia, are you going to speak to that?
Yes, a couple things. Number one, along the sides, you have Al Shlosha Devarim, Al Torah Ve'al Avodah Al Gemilut Chasadim, and then the other side is Din Mishpat, and I guess it's Shalom if I remember correctly. You have Kol HaNeshama also represented, and many arcs have got messages that talk about the community. I remember my own synagogue growing up, Pitchuli Sharei Tzedek was written on the ark. So when they would open the ark, they were opening the gates of righteousness. Or Shiviti Lashem Kol Zaman. I compare myself, or I compare.
Kenegdi Tamid.
Kenegdi, thank you, yes. So frequently there are words already in the synagogue that talk about what we think as a community are important.
Right. So the articulation of the values of Judaism and of Adat Shalom are written on its walls. And I often, when I sat there, would read those, and they would bolster me. They would add for me a sense of, oh, this is a place that really articulates my values, that does that. I also wanted to point out that long before the current building of Adat Shalom was ever constructed, the very fact that that the building committee was looking at ecologically and environmentally friendly values and realities. The fact that there was no piece of wood in the Adat Shalom building that wasn't recycled. The fact that so much of the building that it won a prize in its first construction for environmentally friendly construction, and much of the credit to that is to Rabbi Fred and his commitment to environmental causes. I think that that Rabbi Dorf's comment here is that the sacred space of a shul communicates its theology. So I see a number of hands raised. Nancy, please go ahead.
Thanks. Well, I was going to mention the environmental part, but the other one I wanted to mention was the aesthetics of having so much light and visuals to the outside. I mean, there's a very airy feeling to it that I think creates a feeling of uplift and beauty that is very inspiring.
Yes, absolutely. I also think it's very interesting to me that the designers, the architects, and the building committee made for tradition in the absolute clear sense that at the very top of the dome is a design of a traditional shul. The dome of the balcony of Adat Shalom evokes a more traditional shul, and the rest is more modern. It evokes that sense of living in an evolving civilization. It's very, very lovely. Ralph, and then Malka, and then Shlomo.
Yeah, when you were setting this up, I thought that you were getting the issue of, I'd like it to inspire acts that go beyond the sanctuary back out into the community, into our daily lives.
Right.
And especially not just the Jewish community, but the larger world. So that's kind of something with some of the Hasidic, it's an issue, but.
I completely was planning on going there, and thank you for bringing it up. If you look just below Rabbi Dorf's comment, and no, don't go so far. Don't go so far. Just right there. That not only do we have the sacred space, but from the Mechilta, wherever you find a human footprint, there is God before you. That the actions, Ralph, that you were talking about are right there. And then the next one right below that, do you know where God is? The Kobrina Rebbe asked his Hasidim. Then he took a piece of bread and showed it to them. God is in this piece of bread. Without God's nurturing power in all nature, this bread would have no existence. But obviously the implication is that some human being is going to offer that bread. So it's right there. It's right there. It's beyond the physical space where the values are articulated. It's also in the doing. It's also in the action. So what did I say? I said Malka, Shlomo, and now I see Bob. Go ahead.
I'd like to point out the actual shape of the sanctuary, where it's in a semicircle. And also the bima is not way high up. It's a little bit closer to the ground. And that, I feel, that is because we don't look at the rabbi as apart and above us, but that the rabbis are closer to the people, and we are able to be one. And that's why we call our rabbis by their first name too. So there's more of a kesher, more of a communication, more of a togetherness. So the actual physical form is how we makes us feel. Right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Shlomo and then Bob.
I just wanted to ask, of course, I haven't been a member of the congregation for a while, but when the congregation moved from the JCC to the new building, did we not have a parade and carried a Sefer Torah out in the streets and then up to our building? Do I remember that correctly?
I helped carry it. I was there. Yes, you were there. You remember.
Well, this discussion just sparked that memory, and I'm kind of, I don't know if I want to use the word overwhelmed, but I'm filled with that memory right now.
It's a joyful memory, and it's also an expression of pride, and it's a traditional thing to do. It's the combination of tradition and pride and all of that together. Absolutely, Bob.
Well, I was just going to say that the theme continues even outside the borders of the building. We have the Mishnah Garden. The parking lot it uses lamps that preserve night lighting, that doesn't give light pollution. And even the groundwater that collects from our property goes over to the golf course, and they use it for watering their greens and things. In other words, that it's not the Mishkan itself is not just the physical structure, but it's the entire environment. And the whole idea was we wanted to have a open setting. When you walk through the up to the building, you go underneath the wooden structures. There's two ponds on the side, evoking a lot of the Middle East in the spiritual sense. So the idea was not just the building. I think it was create an entire environment that evoked the spirituality.
I think that's absolutely true, and I see a couple of comments here which are very from Barb. One comment: last June, when Charlie and I walked into the sanctuary for the first time in 15 months, I cried. I was deeply moved. That said, God and the divine definitely resides whenever and however we gather, Zoom included. We've long told our daughters, wherever you go, there's an Adat Shalomer with all the implications. I think that's I don't know if it was your intent, Barb, but that certainly includes Shlomo, who's now in Philadelphia, but he's certainly an Adat Shalomer in many ways. And then
Yes, actually, if I may amplify,
Sure.
We've been in long ago when we used to fly. We've been in airports and run into Adat Shalomers. When our daughters went out, sometimes they saw Adat Shalomers in restaurants. This is when they were young, and they just always felt that there was the sense of the community was very broad, and with them, looking out for them and looking out at them as would be appropriate for teenage daughters.
Right. I think that's absolutely wonderful. And I was saying at the beginning, before many of you first came online, that it's wonderful for us. You know, we now live in Frederick, and we are part of a very wonderful community here that we enjoy, and we've made friends. But it's wonderful to come on and see so many familiar faces and see people with whom we have memories and so on. So Adat Shalom is a very special place, and I think that part of it is this combination of what Truma brings us is this sense of offering, not only in writing the check and the financial part of it, but the much more holistic sense of taking care of each other, of taking care of the environment, of what Rabbi Dorff talks about in terms of the space communicating our theology, and Amy's comment about even composting the onyx scraps and so on, and the planting of trees that are biblical trees, the ponds, the water shed into the golf club, the use of recycled wood, all of that, and it continues. It didn't just stop at the time of the building of the building, but it continues, and I think that that's very good. I'm looking at the chat for additional comments. The donation of food banks from our garden, and Barb, your comment that Truma really is about give and take. It really is that, and that's why if you go a couple of parshiot forward, when you get to Vayakel, and I've mentioned it twice already, but again, that's why the donations didn't stop. They kept coming because of the sense of purpose and satisfaction in giving, and you know that as much as I give, I take back. Let's go down one more in the and this is Rabbi Pinchas Pelly. Whoops, you missed it. Go down. There you go. And there's something. Come on. I don't know what that is that keeps appearing. There we go. The Mikdash was not a dwelling place for God. And that's important. It wasn't in ancient Canaanite and Jebusite and Ammonite culture. The place where the deity dwelled was where the idol was, the location of the idol. The Mishkan was very different. The Mikdash, or the Mishkan, was not a dwelling place for God, but a place set aside for people to come and experience more intensely the indwelling presence of God in the world at large. It represented a way of recreating the universe in the center of which is God. No Israelite believed that God dwelled in the Mishkan. What an Israelite believed was that proximity to the Mishkan had them closer to the Shekhinah, which was the indwelling within themselves and the community. And that's a substantive difference. You can take it down now, Audrey, please. That's a substantive difference. That's why there is so much of an emphasis in Judaism that you can daven anywhere, you can be in community anywhere. We are very lucky that there's a shul like Adat Shalom and so on, but you don't need it. Ultimately, in our contemporary world and in the medieval period and even before that, you had shuls which articulated what Rabbi Dorff mentioned and so on, but ultimately the indwelling presence, it says where 10 Jews gather, that's where the Shekhinah dwells. And where the Kahal gathers, that's where the Shekhinah dwells. Steve?
So you said a moment ago that the Israelites did not believe that or whatever. But I wonder, it strikes me that this is perhaps a more modern perspective. I would think that if this represents a true historical telling of the gatherings of our people 3,500 or whatever it is, 3,000 years ago, whatever, that many of them would indeed think that a supreme being would be present. And it's really a bit more enlightenment over the years to say it's more within us or when we gather.
It might be, and I acknowledge the evolution over time of my own thinking. Absolutely, and you may be right in that, and it may be a good criticism. On the other hand, the Torah itself doesn't say to us, "V'shachanti b'tocho," and I dwelled within it. Right. And that's a very, very significant difference. Make me a mikdash, and I will dwell within them, the people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very significant phrase. It is. It doesn't say, make me a mikdash so I will dwell within the mikdash. And you're right that I'm seeing a note in the Malka's comment about the golden calf. The fact is that when they personified God, or when they centralized God within an object, they were punished because that simply was not truth. That was not theological truth. So to have encompassed, even in the Holy of Holies, in the temple once it was there was not a belief that God's self dwelled there. The indwelling of God was in the people, and the essence of God may have been manifest to the priest as the priest went into Kodesh Kedoshim. But even in those times, there was a sophistication of thought, and when there wasn't, like in the golden calf, it was disabused very quickly. So I may be guilty of a little bit of anachronism, but I'm not so sure it was so great. So I see 3 hands up, Sue Ann, and then David, and then Shlomo. And with that, I think we're going to have to stop.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The context, I remember reading this from Robert Alter's comments, is that this whole story about the tabernacle and the Mishkan, the building of it, is inserted while Moses is up on the mountain, and God is with Moses. So God is in more than one place at the same time.
Always.
And I think it's important to note the context that this whole discussion in the Torah occurs while Moses is up on the mountain. It's inserted at that point.
Absolutely, and that's a very, very important point, Sue Ann, that God is everywhere. God was everywhere. And the fact that Luther just points out that it's a portable Mishkan. How can you encase God in just this portable place? God is far more extensive than that.
That's why one of his names is Hamakom.
Hamakom, exactly. And Hamakom is everywhere. Hamakom is not in just one place. Okay, David.
I would, well, I agree. And another piece of evidence for that is that the very first Torah stories, God's not even in the land of Israel, where he talks to the patriarchs, talks to Moses, talks to the people, and talks to different people at the same time in different places. So I think it's not just implicit, it's very explicit in the Bible that God doesn't dwell in one place. And you've got Kadosh, 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 holy, holy. The whole world is filled with God's kavod. So take that as given, and then that raises the next question, which means, what does it mean to say Shachanti b'tocham, especially because the Israelites were not allowed to go into the Mikdash or the Mishkan. There was an outer courtyard where they could go, but they were not there. So maybe b'tocham, it was in the middle of them, but it wasn't, they weren't there inside of it. So having established that God doesn't live there, what does it mean to say that there's this dwelling of God in the Mishkan, or later the Mikdash, within the middle of the people? It's sort of, I think that it really is kind of a very different thing. Yes, God is inside of each person, but the people are not in there. So that's a later idea. I would agree with that, but that's not really there. What we've got here is that there's this center point, and they're not there, but God, but that is sort of the focal point, or the focus. And it's not just anywhere. We later find out that has to be a single place, and it's later located in Jerusalem, but there can't be a Mishkan all over the place. So why does there have to be a special place with a special size curtains and special size planks and certain types of sacrifices that is considered the draw or the focal point or something for the presence of God? It's the way that they, in those days, sort of brought God among them or something. I mean, so there are a lot of distinctions.
Right, right. And without those rituals, it would be less potent. There's no question. Right,
and they're not there for the rituals. That it's only the priests who are in there. The Israelites might smell it or hear it, but they're not inside there to see it.
Right, right, absolutely. And I think this is going to be our last comment, Shlomo.
Yeah, you've mentioned Parashat Vayakel a number of times today, where Moses has to tell the people, stop giving. You're giving too much. And of course, this speaks to the spirit of the people at that time, and the how joyful and happy they are and ready to give. And I want to contrast that with, in the first parasha of Shemot, where Moses is talking to the people, and he uses the words "v'hotzeti," I will bring you out, "v'lakachti," "v'hitzalti," and the people lo sham'u mikotzer ruach. They didn't listen to Moses because they were so dispirited. And since much of the rest of what we're going to be looking at in Shemot is going to be 4 cubits of wood this wide, and I'm very interested in trying to look at, from this lowest point where they couldn't even hear Moses when he was telling them all the good that's going to happen to them, they were so dispirited, to this point in Vayakel where they just can't do enough. I kind of look and see, what are the things that happen which raise the spirits of the people from this low point to this incredibly high point where they're just giving and giving and have to be told to stop. So maybe as we go forward in our discussion over the weeks, we can take a look at that transition in the people.
I think that's a very good thing to look at. I would offer the tentative suggestion that as as a community has a building project, it gets energized.
Unfortunately, I'm going to respond to that by saying they had a building project even when their spirits were the lowest, and that was Pitom and Ramses.
Yes.
They were building 2 Egyptian cities,
but it wasn't their own. They didn't own it.
It's true.
It wasn't their own. And so we have to stop, but I want to say that it's qualitatively different when it's their own and they are building. In the same way that I would suspect that even though there may have been a lot of fetching about all the money that had to go in to the Adat Shalom building, there was a certain energy building. And when that building was completed, there was intense joy. So we'll stop with that. Okay, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you next week. And next week we are on for Tetzaveh, Parashat Tetzaveh, which, as you know, is a lot about details. We're going to be talking about the priests and the priests' garments and see where we go from there. Okay.